My name is Roberta Grimes. It's long past time for Americans to have a frank conversation about race. As we can see, our attempts at curing our racial problems have only made them worse. But I'm confident that we can heal them now and in only one generation if we will come together as a nation and do what we should have done long ago. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King said, "We must learn to live together as brothers or perish together as fools." And he's right. So Kelley Glover and I have written The Fun of Living Together. Dr. King has waited long enough. Kelley and I have been friends for years without much talking about race. Then eventually we did start to talk about it. The fun of living together is our plea that you will join us now in creating a better future for all Americans. More than 80% of the black people now living in America are descended from freed slaves. The Emancipation Proclamation was signed 150 years ago, but still, most living descendants of American slavery lived demeaning and hopeless lives. But why? Don't say racism. Racism is a symptom. It's not the cause. And we can never end racism in America until we finally attack the cause. Just look at these statistics. Half of young black children live in poverty. 2/3 of black children are in single-parent homes, and 40% of black men are in prison or are ex-offenders. Incredibly, black people make up half of our homicide victims. Nearly all their murderers are black as well. Not only are we not making racial progress, but in some ways we're going backward. More than 60 years after Brown versus Board of Education, America's schools are more segregated than ever. 16% of our schools are in poor areas. 61% of those schools serve minority children almost exclusively. America's racial issues are getting worse. And Kelley and I believe that this is because 150 years ago, we botched the emancipation process. Our slaves were freed in a civil war. Then they were abandoned to the mercies of the Southern white people whose lives we had just destroyed. What did we think would happen? The former slaves and their descendants suffered a century of Jim Crow oppression and abasement. It was slavery without papers for 100 years. Then eventually Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s peaceful marches and speeches persuaded our government to try to right this old wrong. But again, we made a botch of it. Instead of helping the descendants of slavery to at last claim their part of the American dream, our government re-enslaved them financially. It also broke up most of their families. Think about that. The federal government began to pay mothers to evict the fathers from their children's lives. Our whole modern tragedy of black male incarceration, drug use, and gangs, and the destruction of our inner cities has been the entirely predictable result. Our popular conception is that slavery was bad because it was violent and the slaves worked for free. But it turns out that what lingers of slavery over generations is its effects on the human mind. The slave's sense of being inferior, of being hopeless and beaten down and less, is something though whose ongoing influence we as a nation have never acknowledged or addressed. Kelley and I make the case in The Fun of Living Together that most of the descendants of American slavery still live in a kind of slavery light. And we have thrown everything we can think of at trying to fix a few of the symptoms of their problem. But because we haven't understood the cause, we've succeeded just in making things worse. So what do we do now? The most important thing for us to do is to learn from our mistakes. Just attacking the symptoms of our racial divide hasn't helped. It's time for us to fix the cause. Here are 6 lessons that America has learned the hard way. First, the only way to help people is to personally empower them. Empowering the former slaves to be free Americans was the step we missed taking in 1865. Second, no matter what we do, human dignity and self-worth must be enhanced. raising the self-esteem of slavery's descendants and uplifting them in every American's mind will be essential if we are ever to come together. Third, intact families are essential to a healthy society. In 1960, most descendants of slavery lived in intact families. By 1980, most of those families had broken up. Think about that. What slavery and Jim Crow failed to do, the breakdown of the black family, our government did in one generation. And fourth, children need both parents. For 50 years, the United States has been conducting an experiment in rearing children in enforced single-parent homes. Most of what is wrong with America now traces directly to the failure of that experiment. Fifth, whatever we do now must begin to unite black and white Americans. Black people are 13% of the population. They cannot live the American dream unless they are integrated into our society so completely that soon people's shade of skin will not be the first thing people notice. Finally, sixth, all Americans must be invited to share in solving America's racial problems. Once the federal government explains to Americans why we still have racial issues, and both political parties work together to implement real solutions, this country can at last begin to heal. Now here comes the fun part. How can we accomplish the full emancipation that should have been completed long ago? Here's what Kelley and I would do. First, to finally cut that long tail of slavery, let's give all of slavery's descendants born from 2010 through 2040 a free private education at the nation's best schools. We can take the descendants of slavery from Brand X to Brand Elite in one generation. Then soon, black and white Americans will no longer look at those with darker skin and think less. Instead, darker skin will begin to mean more. And these new Brand Elite descendants of slavery will pass their status on to their descendants. Soon all the symptoms of slavery's tale, the racism and poverty and the line between races that makes us uneasy with one another, all of that will be no more. Second, we've got to invite slavery's descendants into full American citizenship. This is the step that was missed when we halfway freed America's slaves 150 years ago. We'll need to find many creative ways to help each living descendant of slavery to build a happy personal future. And third, it's time to celebrate. If we had peacefully emancipated the slaves and integrated them as full Americans, there would have been parades and fireworks. It would have been such a happy time. Americans were cheated of our celebration back then. By now, we really need it. The year 2018 will be the 50th anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. Let's make it a year-long celebration of the greatest American of the 20th century. As a man who fought the Jim Crow South to a standstill using only his pen and his loving example, Dr. King must be our model now for the better America that's at last being born. Then finally, let's make 2019 our great year of Jubilee. Most historians mark 1619 as the start of America's chattel slavery. Now, our generation is going to be cutting slavery's final tail. So let's make 2019 the grandest celebration in all of human history. No blaming and no looking back, but just parades and fireworks and a joining of all our hands without regard to race. A resounding final ending to what we should have ended long ago. Dear friends, let's come together as a nation and finally right this ancient wrong. Then all of us and the America we love can share a joyous new beginning. If not us, who? And if not now, when? My name is Roberta Grimes. My wonderful co-author is Kelley Glover. You can reach me through robertagrimes.com and Kelley through youbettersing.org. That's the letter U, BETTERSING.org. Thank you for listening. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "I have decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear." He also said, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." If we'll follow his loving example now, Dr. King's dream is within our reach.